The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint tang of smoke as the young nobleman, Adrian, stepped off the carriage onto the cobblestone street of the secluded fortress town. He was 17, tall and lean, with long dark hair that fell past his shoulders and sharp angular features that often gave him a naturally stern expression. His piercing gray eyes scanned the surroundings, alert yet curious, as he pulled his dark brown cloak tighter around his shoulders to ward off the chilly morning breeze. Adrian had been sent here by his father, a stern man with a reputation for cruelty, to apprentice under the master of the fortress, a man whose name was whispered with equal measures of fear and respect throughout the region. The young noble's heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He had grown accustomed to the opulence of the capital, the perfumed corridors and gilded halls. But this place was different. Stone walls stretched high and cold, their surfaces etched with the scars of countless battles and sieges. The distant clanging of metal echoed through the streets, a stark reminder that power was measured in strength here, not in wealth or status. As Adrian walked toward the gate, he noticed the townspeople pausing in their daily routines, their eyes wary, almost fearful. Mothers pulled children close, merchants lowered their voices, and soldiers patrolled with an air of rigid discipline. Every glance seemed to carry a warning, a subtle insistence that outsiders, especially those of noble blood, must tread carefully. A heavy wooden gate creaked open, revealing a courtyard that smelled of damp straw and iron. Adrian stepped inside, his boots echoing on the stone. The courtyard was bustling with activity. Men in worn armor sharpened swords while others dragged heavy barrels of supplies. At the center, a figure stood commanding attention. A man in his 40s, broad-shouldered with eyes like shards of obsidian and a presence that demanded obedience. This was Master Veyron, the fortress commander, whose methods were as legendary as they were feared. "Adrian, son of Lord Havel," Veyron said, his voice resonant and authoritative, cutting through the ambient noise. "You have come to learn the ways of discipline, endurance, and command. But understand this, here weakness is not forgiven. It is exploited." Adrian bowed respectfully, trying to mask the flutter of anxiety in his chest. "I am ready to serve, Master Veyron," he replied, his voice steady, though his hands clenched involuntarily at his sides. Veyron's gaze pierced him, as if weighing the very fiber of his being. "Words are cheap," he said, gesturing toward a training ground where young recruits were already sparring. "Action proves worth. Today you begin your trial." The courtyard was a flurry of movement, steel clashing against steel, grunts of exertion mingling with the occasional shout. Adrian observed, noting the coordination, the precision, and the brutal efficiency of each strike. Even among those of similar age, the display was intimidating. Some bore bruises and fresh cuts, yet they fought with unwavering focus. Here experience was carved into flesh, and every moment was a lesson in survival. Adrian's first task was simple in instruction, but taxing in execution, lifting and moving heavy wooden beams to fortify the barracks. Yet each beam seemed heavier than the last, a test of physical endurance designed to humble him. The commander watched silently, occasionally nodding to himself, measuring Adrian's fortitude. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, casting sharp shadows across the stone walls. Adrian's muscles burned, his palms were blistered, and a sheen of sweat covered his brow. Yet he persevered, driven by a mix of pride and the fear of failure. Around him, the other trainees exchanged looks of either pity or admiration. He was an outsider, yes, but he did not falter. By midday, the commander called for a brief respite. Adrian, dripping with sweat, leaned against the stone wall, inhaling deeply. In that quiet moment, he reflected on his father's words. "Survive this place, and you will learn more than any court ever could." The weight of expectation pressed down on him, but he also felt a flicker of resolve, a spark that perhaps this trial could forge him into someone stronger. As the afternoon wore on, Adrian was summoned to the armory, where he met a small group of recruits who would become his immediate peers. Among them was Liora, a 17-year-old girl with fiery red hair and emerald eyes, who carried herself with an air of defiance. Her sharp gaze assessed Adrian critically. "You're the Lord's son, aren't you?" she asked, a mix of challenge and curiosity in her voice. Adrian nodded cautiously. "I am, and you are?" "Liora," she replied curtly. "Don't expect anyone here to treat you differently. Titles mean nothing within these walls." Her tone was firm, yet there was a hint of camaraderie that suggested respect for those who endured. The day culminated with a demonstration of the fortress's most dreaded discipline, the Shadow Trial. It was a test of endurance and mental fortitude rather than overt violence, yet it carried an unspoken threat. Adrian was blindfolded, guided into a dimly lit chamber where only the sound of dripping water and distant echoes accompanied him. Every misstep, every falter was noted. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, mocking weakness. Though no blade touched him, the psychological weight was palpable. Sweat dripped down his temples, and his heart raced in tandem with every distant footstep. When the blindfold was finally removed, Adrian found himself before Master Veyron once more. "You have survived your first trial," the commander stated. "But remember, survival here is merely the beginning. The shadows of this place are long, and they stretch far beyond what your eyes can see." His gaze lingered on Adrian, hinting at challenges yet to come, at burdens and darkness that would test every fiber of his being. As dusk fell, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold, Adrian stood atop the fortress wall looking over the town below. The air was crisp, the scent of smoke now mingling with the faint aroma of baked bread from distant homes. He was tired, sore, and wary, but within him stirred a quiet determination. He understood now more than ever that this place would change him, and whether for better or worse, he was ready to face the shadows that awaited. Morning arrived with a chill that seemed to seep into Adrian's bones. The courtyard, now bathed in pale light, was alive with movement. Soldiers training, recruits carrying out endless drills, and the occasional shout echoing off stone walls. Adrian, though sore from the previous day's labor, had already begun to rise with the first rays of dawn. The fortress demanded vigilance, and he had learned that tardiness here was a subtle invitation to humiliation. As he made his way to the training ground, he noticed a figure at the edge of the courtyard, a boy roughly his age but markedly different. Where Adrian carried himself with caution, this newcomer exuded an unsettling confidence. He was slightly shorter, muscular, with tousled brown hair and a mischievous glint in his amber eyes. His name, Adrian soon learned, was Kael. Kael's presence was magnetic, drawing the attention of other recruits, yet there was something dangerous about him, a streak of recklessness that whispered trouble. Kael approached Adrian with a sly grin. "So you're the Lord's son," he said, voice light but edged with curiosity. "They say Veyron expects a lot from you. Don't let him break that fine spine of yours too easily." Adrian's gray eyes narrowed. "I intend to learn and survive," he replied cautiously, sensing the undercurrent of challenge in Kael's tone. Kael laughed softly, then gestured toward the training grounds. "Good. Let's see if your strength matches your resolve. Come, follow me." The two boys began training together, their movements mirroring the rigorous patterns dictated by Veyron. Steel met steel, and sweat mingled with dust as the day wore on. Adrian noticed that Kael fought with a freedom he had never known in the ordered drills of the capital, reckless at times, yet extraordinarily precise when it mattered. Observing Kael, Adrian realized that discipline here did not always follow a straight line. Cunning and adaptability were equally important. As they sparred, a shadow passed over Adrian's concentration. He caught sight of Liora observing them from a distance, her green eyes sharp, lips pressed in a thin line. There was a tension in her stance, an unspoken assessment. Adrian felt a pang of self-consciousness but pushed it aside. He had learned that distraction could be fatal here. Mid-afternoon brought a summons to the commander's quarters. Veyron's office was austere, high ceilings, dark wooden beams, and walls lined with the spoils of past campaigns, shields, banners, and the occasional battle-worn weapon. The commander sat behind a massive desk, his obsidian eyes piercing as always. "You have met Kael," Veyron said, tone neutral, but with an edge that suggested careful calculation. "He will be your partner for today's task, the Whispering Blade." Adrian's heart sank slightly. The Whispering Blade was a test reserved for the bravest recruits, a challenge that involved navigating the narrow corridors and shadowed halls of the fortress with only the faintest guidance from a trusted partner. One misstep could result in humiliation or injury, and every participant was under constant scrutiny. The name itself carried whispers of past failures, of recruits broken by nerves or overconfidence. As they approached the designated hallways, Adrian studied Kael. Despite the boy's nonchalant demeanor, Adrian could sense a keen intelligence, a mind always calculating the next move. They moved in tandem, each footfall careful, every handhold precise. The hall was dimly lit, torches flickering and casting long shadows that danced across stone walls. The silence between steps was thick, punctuated only by their measured breathing and the occasional distant clatter of training. Kael whispered instructions, guiding Adrian past hidden pitfalls and unstable flooring. Adrian felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. He trusted Kael's skill, yet the unpredictability of the boy kept him on edge. Every corner turned was a lesson in focus and presence, a test of nerves as much as of physical coordination. Halfway through the trial, a sudden noise, a loose stone clattering across the hall, made Adrian stumble. His heart leapt, and for a fleeting moment panic threatened to overtake him. Kael's hand shot out, steadying him. "Focus," he murmured, amber eyes catching the dim torchlight. "The shadows only win if you lose yourself," they continued, navigating narrow staircases and low-ceiling chambers until finally reaching the heart of the trial. A central hall lined with banners, where Veyron and several senior recruits observed silently. The Whispering Blade had been passed successfully. The shadowy halls had not broken Adrian. Sweat poured down his face, muscles trembling, yet an exhilaration surged within him. Survival had never felt more victorious. Exiting the hall, Adrian took a moment to breathe in the crisp evening air. The trial had tested not only his strength, but his trust and perception. Kael smirked, brushing dust from his tunic. "Not bad for a lord's son," he teased, though the hint of respect in his tone was unmistakable. Adrian nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. For the first time since arriving, he felt a spark of camaraderie, a sense that alliances might be formed even in the most perilous of places. Yet, beneath the surface, he sensed that the fortress held deeper shadows, mysteries and dangers that would continue to challenge both mind and body. As dusk settled, painting the sky with shades of violet and amber, Adrian and Kael returned to the barracks. Liora awaited, her green eyes glinting in the twilight. "You made it," she said softly. "But remember, the Whispering Blade is only the beginning. This fortress, it tests more than just strength." Her tone was both warning and invitation, a challenge that Adrian knew he must accept if he was to survive and thrive. The next morning was heavy, with an ominous sense of expectation. The fortress was quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Adrian awoke early, muscles still aching from yesterday's trials, but a gnawing tension urged him to rise. Today was no ordinary day. The senior officers had prepared a challenge meant to test not only strength, but loyalty, cunning, and composure under pressure. As he donned his tunic and laced his boots, Adrian's mind wandered to Kael. The boy's unpredictability both unsettled and intrigued him. Trusting Kael had been necessary to navigate the Whispering Blade. But Adrian understood that the fortress was a place where alliances were fragile. Any misstep could be used against him. In the courtyard, recruits were assembled in neat lines. Veyron, his commanding presence dominating the space, surveyed the group with piercing black eyes. "Today," he said, voice deep and resonant, "you will face the shadows of authority." His words drew murmurs among the recruits. Adrian felt a chill. The shadows of authority was an exercise in psychological endurance, requiring obedience under stress, subtle observation, and precise execution of orders. Failure meant public humiliation, and sometimes worse. Adrian's partner was again Kael, whose confident grin now seemed tinged with excitement rather than mischief. "Ready to see how deep the shadows go?" Kael whispered. Adrian nodded, though the unease in his stomach warned him that today would push him beyond limits he had yet to encounter. The first task was simple in theory. Retrieve a set of marked scrolls from the upper gallery while following strict commands from supervising officers. Yet the execution was anything but simple. The upper gallery was narrow, with uneven stone steps and low-hanging beams. Any deviation from instruction was noted and punished. Each misstep, each hesitation drew sharp looks or pointed comments. Adrian's heart raced as he carefully climbed the steps, Kael beside him, whispering reminders in precise tones. Halfway through, a senior officer deliberately issued contradictory commands, testing the recruit's focus and judgment. Adrian froze momentarily, confusion clouding his thoughts. Kael's hand brushed his arm, steadying him. "Think, don't just obey," Kael hissed, amber eyes blazing. That single act of guidance grounded Adrian, allowing him to navigate the confusing orders with measured movements. The exercise intensified. Recruits were subjected to staged intimidation, harsh shouts, sudden mock threats, and simulated traps. Adrian could feel the psychological strain, the subtle manipulation designed to break confidence. Sweat ran down his face, hands trembling slightly. Yet he pressed forward, recalling Kael's advice and the memory of Liora's steady, watchful gaze from the courtyard. She was observing the interaction closely, her green eyes sharp, silently noting who faltered and who adapted. A pivotal moment came when Adrian was separated briefly from Kael in a dim hallway. Alone, the shadows seemed to press in, and the echoes of orders bounced unnaturally off stone walls. Doubt gnawed at him, every instinct screamed to panic. But Adrian focused on his breathing, recalling Kael's whisper, "The shadows only win if you lose yourself." He visualized the path, stepped carefully, and finally reunited with Kael at the gallery's end. Reaching the final chamber, they were confronted by a senior officer whose task was to simulate a high-pressure confrontation. The officer scrutinized Adrian's choices, Kael's guidance, and their ability to remain composed under scrutiny. Adrian's pulse thudded in his ears as the officer circled, silent except for the occasional sharp comment. He could feel the weight of authority pressing down, an invisible force that tested resolve more than muscle. Emerging from the chamber, the challenge concluded. Adrian's uniform was rumpled, sleeves damp with sweat, face flushed from exertion and stress. Yet there was pride beneath the exhaustion. He had endured, adapted, and learned a subtle but vital lesson. Strength alone was insufficient. Insight, observation, and trust in capable allies were equally important. Kael clapped him on the shoulder, the teasing smile replaced by genuine respect. Later in the barracks, Adrian reflected on the trial. Liora approached, her green eyes assessing, expression unreadable. "The shadows of authority, they reveal much about character," she said. "You endured. But remember, the fortress tests far more than courage. Tomorrow the trials will challenge your loyalties, your perceptions, and your patience. Never let fear or pride blind you." Adrian nodded, feeling both the weight of expectation and the spark of determination. The fortress had begun to teach him that survival required a balance of strength, intellect, and emotional control. Every shadow was a lesson, every challenge a crucible. The morning fog clung to the fortress walls, a soft gray veil that blurred the edges of reality. Adrian moved cautiously along the stone corridors, senses heightened. Today's trial promised deception, cunning, and the type of mental dexterity that could not be learned overnight. The senior officers had designed what they called the Labyrinth of Deception, a series of tests meant to confuse, mislead, and reveal character through misdirection and observation. Kael was already at the starting point, leaning casually against a wall, amber eyes glinting with anticipation. "You ready to get lost?" he asked, smirking, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his own nervous excitement. Adrian nodded, swallowing his anxiety. The maze wasn't literal. It was a sequence of challenges that twisted reality, manipulated perception, and tested moral choices. The first segment involved retrieving coded tokens from hidden compartments along narrow corridors. Officers stationed themselves at strategic points, watching every movement. The corridors were lined with false doors, misleading shadows, and subtle auditory illusions designed to distract. Adrian felt a twinge of unease each time a door proved false, but he forced himself to focus, carefully noting patterns in the lighting and the slight shifts in stonework that indicated the true path. Kael moved alongside him, pointing out nuances, whispering strategies that Adrian could barely catch over the pounding of his own heartbeat. Midway through, a false alarm was triggered. A senior officer shouted orders that seemed impossible to reconcile. Recruits froze, confusion spreading like a wave. Adrian's instinct screamed to obey immediately, but Kael's hand on his arm stopped him. "Think, don't just follow. The maze punishes the thoughtless," he whispered. Adrian inhaled, considered the sequence of events, and chose a path that diverged subtly from the shouted commands. His gamble paid off. They moved forward unscathed, observing other recruits stumble under pressure. The psychological strain deepened. At one point, Adrian and Kael were confronted with a staged ambush. A room that appeared empty, yet shadows shifted unnaturally, and sounds of movement echoed through the stone. They had to cross without touching certain tiles on the floor, a test of observation and nerve. Every step demanded attention. Every misjudgment was noted. Adrian felt his pulse quicken as Kael guided him, and together they navigated the room with tense precision, their breath shallow and measured. Emerging from the ambush, they entered a gallery filled with mirrors and distorted reflections. Officers whispered instructions, some contradictory, some irrelevant. Adrian struggled to maintain clarity, recognizing that the maze tested not only perception but also moral choices. Each reflection offered an opportunity to mislead, to manipulate, or to act selflessly. Kael's eyes met his, silently conveying trust. Adrian chose carefully, resisting temptation, and together they continued, feeling the invisible grip of authority and scrutiny tighten with each decision. The climax of the trial came when they reached the central chamber. Here, a senior officer staged a confrontation designed to simulate betrayal. Recruits were subtly instructed to mislead one another, to challenge loyalty under stress. Adrian's internal struggle was intense. He had to act convincingly without compromising integrity, navigating the psychological battlefield with precision. Kael remained calm, guiding with subtle gestures and whispered advice, their silent communication a lifeline amidst orchestrated chaos. At the end of the labyrinth of deception, Adrian and Kael were evaluated on not only success in navigation but also judgment, composure, and interpersonal acumen. Adrian's face was flushed, hands trembling slightly, yet he felt a surge of triumph. He had learned that intelligence, intuition, and careful observation were as critical as strength or courage. The labyrinth had exposed weaknesses, but it had also revealed resilience, adaptability, and the subtle power of trust. Later, in the quiet of the barracks, Liora approached, her green eyes sharp and assessing. "You handled the labyrinth well," she said. "But remember, deception is only dangerous when you are blind to it. Trust must be measured, observation constant. There will be more trials, each more subtle, each demanding more than muscle. Adaptation is your weapon." Adrian nodded, absorbing her words, recognizing that survival in the fortress demanded more than endurance. It demanded awareness, discernment, and a mind attuned to nuance. The courtyard lay in eerie silence under a pale morning sun, the frost still clinging to the cobblestones. Adrian adjusted the strap of his satchel, his breath visible in the cold air. The latest trial demanded agility, cunning, and the ability to read intent without words. Rumors had spread among the recruits that this test would expose both loyalty and treachery. Kael appeared at the archway, his amber eyes scanning the perimeter. "Be careful today," he said quietly, his voice steady but low enough for only Adrian to hear. "Not everything is what it seems, and not everyone you trust is truly loyal." Adrian nodded, tension coiling in his chest. He could feel the weight of observation from the senior officers perched on balconies above. The trial began with a series of tactical exercises. Recruits had to retrieve marked flags scattered across the courtyard while avoiding detection from strategically placed sentinels. Adrian moved with deliberate caution, counting steps, watching shadows, and listening to the slightest creaks from wooden scaffolds and stone stairs. Kael kept pace beside him, whispering tactical advice, their silent coordination a lifeline amidst the chaos. Midway through, a sudden shout rang out. One of the recruits had triggered a trap. False movement alarms designed to mislead and punish rash decisions. Panic rippled through the group. Adrian's instincts screamed to flee, but Kael gripped his arm. "Stay calm. Observe first, act second," he whispered. Together, they avoided the trap, noting the subtle shift in light that indicated the true path. Their measured approach allowed them to advance while others faltered. The tension escalated when the trial introduced a simulated hostage scenario. A dummy representing a captured recruit was placed in a central position, and the recruits were instructed to decide between personal safety and a rescue attempt. The challenge tested not just bravery, but strategy and empathy under pressure. Adrian felt his pulse quicken as he weighed the risk. Choosing rash action could lead to failure, but hesitation could signal cowardice. With Kael's subtle nod, they devised a cautious plan, observing patterns of sentinels and shadows, and executed their approach with precision. Their success, however, attracted scrutiny. A senior officer, hooded and imposing, appeared suddenly, observing Adrian and Kael with an unreadable expression. The officer's presence created a tangible tension. Every movement, every glance was evaluated. The recruits understood that deception could be both a weapon and a liability. Adrian realized that trust was fragile, even between allies, and that the ability to manipulate perception could be as important as physical skill. The climax of the trial involved navigating a section of the courtyard rigged with illusions, false walls, shifting flags, and misleading echoes. Adrian's mind raced as he processed visual and auditory cues, differentiating between reality and manipulation. Kael remained his anchor, silently guiding with gestures and subtle eye contact. The two moved with uncanny coordination, sensing each other's intentions and adjusting instantly to the labyrinthine challenges. Emerging from the trial, Adrian felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. His senses were sharpened, his judgment tested, and his understanding of human nature expanded. The courtyard, once a simple training ground, had become a crucible, forging resilience, adaptability, and the subtle mastery of strategy and perception. Later, in the dim warmth of the mess hall, Liora approached. Her green eyes were discerning, her expression sharp. "You both performed admirably," she said, her tone calm yet authoritative. "Remember, every success attracts attention, and every display of skill invites envy. In this fortress, power and perception are intertwined. Trust selectively, act decisively, and remain ever vigilant." Adrian absorbed her words, knowing that the trials were far from over, and that the real test of character would demand not only strength, but wisdom, cunning, and moral discernment. The walls of the fortress seemed to close in as dusk approached. Adrian felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from the awareness that not all eyes were friendly. The previous trials had revealed skill, but today's challenge would expose cunning, alliances, and betrayal. Whispers moved like shadows through the corridors, carrying rumors that could mislead or harm. Kael led Adrian through a series of narrow passageways, avoiding the main training grounds where senior officers observed from balconies. "We must watch for more than traps," Kael said, voice low. "Some of the recruits will try to manipulate outcomes. Even a friend might act in their own interest." Adrian nodded, the weight of trust heavy in his chest. He realized that perception and deception were as crucial as agility and strength. The challenge involved a labyrinthine sequence. Teams were to capture and protect small flags while contending with opponents and observers. The twist: some recruits were secretly instructed to betray their teams at opportune moments. Adrian and Kael immediately recognized the potential for hidden adversaries. They moved with calculated caution, signaling silently and observing reactions to subtle provocations. The tension escalated when a sudden commotion erupted near the northern wall. One of the recruits, a tall youth with a reputation for ruthlessness, attempted to seize an unprotected flag. Adrian's instincts kicked in. He intercepted just in time, forcing the aggressor into a defensive stance. Kael flanked him, watching the other recruits' faces for signs of collusion or deceit. The moment highlighted that survival depended on reading not only the environment, but also human intent. Later, a series of riddles and traps tested memory, observation, and collaboration. One involved deciphering codes hidden in murals along the walls, while another required navigating a bridge that shifted slightly with each step. Adrian focused intently, his senses honed from prior trials, and Kael's steady presence was invaluable. Every misstep could alert the observer officers, risking point deductions or punitive tasks. Amid the labyrinth, Adrian noticed subtle gestures, a nod, a glance, that hinted at hidden alliances. Some recruits whispered while pretending to study murals. Others feigned confusion. Adrian's mind raced, calculating probabilities, considering motives, and weighing the risk of confrontation. When confronted by a sly recruit attempting to mislead them, Adrian responded with calm reasoning, neutralizing potential conflict without violence. Kael's eyes reflected approval. Their synergy was becoming almost intuitive. As night fell, the trial shifted to a psychological challenge. Recruits were separated and subjected to scenarios testing loyalty and self-interest. Adrian faced a simulated choice where helping another recruit could reduce his personal score, while acting selfishly could enhance it. His decision reflected both strategy and character. He balanced personal advantage with foresight, understanding that reputation and perception would matter in the days to come. Finally, the challenge culminated in a staged confrontation in the main courtyard. Senior officers observed from shadowed balconies, noting each decision, hesitation, and initiative. Adrian and Kael moved with coordination, using prior knowledge of pathways, flags, and potential betrayers. Their actions displayed adaptability, mental acuity, and moral discernment, earning nods of approval from the unseen observers. Later in the mess hall, Liora approached again, her gaze sharper than ever. "Cunning and vigilance are invaluable," she said, her voice resonating with authority. "You have navigated deception and demonstrated insight. Remember, in this fortress, knowledge is as powerful as skill, and every misstep can be exploited. Watch, learn, and act decisively." Adrian absorbed her words, knowing that the true tests were becoming increasingly intricate, blending strategy, perception, and human psychology. The night air hung heavy with tension as Adrian and Kael prepared for what was rumored to be the ultimate trial, a simulated siege of the fortress. Word had spread among the recruits that senior officers were testing both defense strategies and the ability to uncover internal threats. Rumors of spies within the fortress circulated like wildfire, and Adrian felt the weight of scrutiny pressing down on him. Every shadow could hide a potential betrayer. Every whisper could carry misinformation. As the trial began, the fortress gates were breached by mock enemy forces. Smoke and flickering torches painted long shadows on stone walls, creating an almost surreal battlefield. Adrian's heart pounded as he and Kael led their team to intercept the approaching threats. They moved with precision, issuing silent commands, positioning themselves where they could block opponents while protecting their own flags. Amid the chaos, Adrian noticed subtle anomalies, familiar recruits acting in strange ways, subtly impeding their team. A glint of recognition in one's eye, a deliberate misstep, a whispered suggestion to abandon a post. Adrian and Kael quickly realized that these were not mistakes, but calculated acts of sabotage. They adjusted strategies on the fly, creating false trails and traps to expose the traitors. The trial escalated further when a sudden, internal alarm rang, a signal that a hidden infiltrator had been detected. The officers had constructed a scenario where some recruits were secretly tasked to act as saboteurs, testing not just combat ability, but insight and intuition. Adrian's mind raced. He had to identify the infiltrator without alarming the rest, to avoid panic and maintain cohesion. In one intense moment, Adrian cornered a youth who had been subtly undermining their movements. With calm authority, he interrogated through sharp observation and deductive reasoning, catching the recruit in contradictions. The young saboteur hesitated, revealing himself through nervous micro-expressions. Kael stepped forward, ready to intervene if violence became necessary. But Adrian diffused the situation with composure and strategic patience. As the mock siege continued, teams were forced to adapt. Flags changed hands rapidly, obstacles appeared unexpectedly, and the officers' eyes tracked every decision. Adrian's team relied on communication, trust, and calculated risk-taking. At every turn, he had to balance aggression with caution, knowing that a single rash action could result in severe point deductions. Amid the chaos, a symbolic pressure point challenge was introduced. Recruits had to navigate a narrow wall walkway while under simulated threat. One misstep could end their participation for the trial. Adrian felt a surge of fear but also clarity. Every motion was deliberate, every breath measured, and Kael's quiet encouragement reinforced his resolve. They reached the end, exposing the saboteurs along the path, earning both points and respect from observing officers. The trial concluded in the main courtyard under moonlight. Adrian's team had successfully defended their positions, uncovered internal threats, and demonstrated tactical ingenuity. Officers evaluated not just outcomes, but the reasoning, coordination, and leadership shown throughout the trial. Adrian felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, a sense that they had survived both external assault and internal deception. Later, in the shadowed corridors of the fortress, Liora approached Adrian once more. "The true test is not the enemies you face outside, but those who lurk within," she said, her gaze piercing. "Trust, vigilance, and judgment are as deadly as any weapon. Remember this lesson well. Your mind and insight are your greatest defense." Adrian absorbed her words, understanding that future trials would demand even greater cunning, foresight, and psychological acumen. Dawn broke over the fortress, casting a pale light across the stone battlements. Adrian awoke with a mixture of anticipation and dread. This was it, the final evaluation. Weeks of grueling trials, psychological tests, and tactical exercises had culminated in a single day of judgment. Officers had promised that this final challenge would test every skill Adrian and his peers had honed, as well as their insight into human nature. The courtyard buzzed with activity as recruits assembled for the last trial. Flags were arranged, weapons inspected, and strategies whispered in hurried tones. Adrian and Kael exchanged a silent nod, both aware that their coordination and trust would be paramount. They had grown together through deception, pressure, and danger, learning to anticipate each other's moves as if reading the same mind. Suddenly, a horn sounded, signaling the start of the trial. From the fortress walls, actors simulating enemy forces began their assault, while other recruits, secretly assigned as saboteurs, moved to disrupt operations from within. Adrian's pulse quickened. He was acutely aware of both threats, the external and the internal. Every decision now could determine the outcome of the entire trial. Adrian immediately assessed the situation. Kael moved to reinforce the eastern flank, while Adrian led a small team to intercept the most aggressive attackers. Smoke curled from mock fires, and the clang of training weapons echoed across the courtyard. Amid the controlled chaos, Adrian spotted a subtle betrayal, a recruit deliberately leaving a gate unguarded. Using a combination of tactical diversion and quiet command, he corrected the flaw without alerting the saboteur, maintaining order and efficiency. Minutes stretched into tense hours. Flags were captured and recaptured, recruits exhausted but relentless. Adrian's mind worked tirelessly, analyzing movements, predicting sabotage, and directing responses with precision. Kael's calm presence beside him provided a steadying anchor, reinforcing the trust and synergy between them. At the midpoint, a mock crisis escalated. An enemy unit feigned a breach into the command center. The officers had staged this scenario to test leadership under extreme pressure. Adrian responded by organizing a layered defense, placing traps and assigning defenders to critical points. He even anticipated the saboteurs' interference, creating contingencies to mitigate their actions. The team executed his plan flawlessly, exposing traitors and neutralizing the simulated threat. Finally, as the sun climbed high, the trial neared its conclusion. Officers meticulously reviewed every action, noting leadership, insight, and adaptability. Adrian felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Exhaustion weighed heavily on his body, but his mind remained alert. Kael, equally fatigued, gave him a small, encouraging nod. When the results were announced in the central hall, tension was palpable. Adrian had not only survived but excelled, uncovering all saboteurs, coordinating effective defense, and demonstrating impeccable judgment under stress. The officer's praise was measured but genuine, acknowledging both his tactical brilliance and psychological acuity. After the ceremony, Liora approached Adrian and Kael once more. Her expression, usually unreadable, softened slightly. "You have demonstrated not just strength but wisdom. The trials are over, yet the true journey has only begun. Remember, the greatest challenges are often invisible, and the greatest victories are won within." Adrian absorbed her words, a mix of pride, relief, and anticipation stirring within him. He understood that these trials had shaped him into more than a recruit. They had honed his mind, tested his judgment, and strengthened bonds of trust. Yet a lingering sense of mystery remained. Hints of future challenges whispered through the corridors of the fortress, promising that the path ahead would be no less demanding. As the sun set behind the battlements, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Adrian and Kael looked toward the horizon. The fortress, a place of trials, learning, and growth, now seemed both a sanctuary and a launchpad. The lessons of deception, pressure, and leadership would carry them forward, preparing them for challenges that extended far beyond the stone walls.